I'd like to call this House to order. I'd like to welcome you to the first round of the World University Debating Championship at De La Salle University. And the motion before the House is that this House would make fathers take paternity leave. And my name is ZHENG. I'll be the chair of this round of debate. And together with me, we have two panelists, Sharif and Andrew. So to start this debate, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister from Hong Kong Polytechnic. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, today what we see in most Western developed democracies, the problem is that when a child is born, only the mother can have the right to take a maternity leave, the time frame of which is determined by the mother's will. So let's say she can choose, since the birth of the children, I can choose to take the leave 4 months before and 6 months afterwards. They can have a choice to do it. I mean, you can do 5-5 or 6-4 or stuff. However, for men, for the father, they do not even have the right to take a paternity leave. Any leave regarding to the child's birth will only be regarded as like the sick leave or other kinds of leave. This is very unfair to both the development of the parents and the children. And this is an inequality between the status of the parent of the father side and the mother side. The thing is that we see that during this stage, father has an added burden both as economically and as psychologically, because while they work whole day, when the mother is feeding her child, the father also has the same psychological worry and other kind of burden the same as the women. And we can see that when we do not grant the father this kind of right to take care of the children himself, we can see that this is unfair. And second of all, the major problem is that we can see that the children has a natural affinity for mother because of this artificial arrangement of the living arrangement. We can see that if parents are not able to take care of the children, there may be like an undesirable effect for the children towards the father. So what we see, coming to the model, what we see as definition of the paternity leave is that we say that this is a leave before and after the child's birth, and we can grant them a leave from the work duties. So later. So our model will be of 3 points. First of all, we say that we will force fathers to take leave. So we can say that the maternity leave and the paternity leave are not mutually exclusive. They can be the side to side. So let's say that they can choose the time frame themselves. So if the mother, so of course before the birth, mother must take the maternity leave because they have to take care of their body. But after the birth, the father and the mother can take like from a shared quota, like 1 year, then they can share the time frame. And they have the freedom, so this is the second point. And the third point is that we have an exception with discretions for if the mother has some kind of serious health problems, then the time may be like they can be adjusted to ensure the safety of the mother. So we have totally 3 points. So my first point is the equality of parents. Second point is the health of children, and the third point, which will be elaborated by my partner, will be this will be the government gesture to promote the equality and the individualist characteristics of a democracy system.
So to clarify, if the father chooses to not take this right to leave as paternity leave, you would still force them to take it?
Yes, because we see that this is a very vital point in developing in ensuring the rights of both parents, parties, and the development of the children. So we think that this is essential. Okay, so coming to my first point, equality of parents. In status quo, we see it's that mothers can take paternity leave. Because of problems like the physical health and the psychological health, they are required to take care of themselves and the children, even if they want to work, which is a very dominant case in today's democracies since the rise of feminism. And what we see on the other side for the father, we see that they need to work the whole time. He alone will carry the whole economic burden of the whole family, and then he will not be exempt from the stress from work and the psychology burden. We see that this is very unfair because we see that children is a common product from love, and we see that of marriage, and each party, like the father and the mother, should be, in principle, share the same responsibility and be able to take care and enjoy the time with their offsprings. So what we see is that there are two major aspects. First of all, we see that a father should have the time to enjoy with the children. They should have time to relax and chill, because after all, not only mothers but fathers will sometimes have some psychological stress due to the birth and due to the mother's anxiety. Because after all, if the mother has some kind of maternal anxiety, she will transfer the stress to the father. This will be an added benefit for the fathers to enjoy the leave. And on the other side, we see that mothers also, if she wants to work, I mean, we allow them to freely adjust the time slot, to allow her to quickly go back to the society to work and be accepted by the society. And on the other side, on the other major side, is that we see that there is a shared responsibility which must be carried out. Because the thing is that it's very unreasonable to lay one responsibility on only one party, on the mother, and especially with the rise of the feminism and the individualistic characteristics of the Western democracies. If we lay a burden on, so by doing this, we can ensure that both parties enjoy the same rights. Yes?
By forcing fathers, is it not an infringement on their right to self-determination under the International Covenant for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
By forcing fathers, is that not infringing upon their right to self-determination under the international...
The thing is that we see that there is a need to change this kind of old set of paradigm. The thing is that there used to be, like, women cannot vote in the past, black people cannot vote in the past. The thing is that those are written on the law. However, the thing is that when we see that we have a common international consensus to bring out the equality of both men and women, we see that there is a need to adjust, and this may be the first step towards bringing this out. And so the second point, which will also be elaborated by my partner, will be the children's health, because the major thing is that in the first few months, there is a major, very crucial stage for the children to establish some kind of psychological kinship, and through the act like breastfeeding or comforting babies, they can smell this bodily scent and the sound of it. This is crucial to the development of the children. So what we see is that we want to enhance the equality of both men and women. We want to ensure the development of the children, and we are proudly proposing.
Thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and I'd like to welcome Adlini to start the opening opposition's case from University of Indonesia. Thank you.
So we have three things that we want to talk about from the opposition side. First of all, we think that this kind of policy of forcing fathers to take leave, even where there might be considerations that they don't want to do so, agreed by the whole family, we think that it's an injustice. We think that first of all, it's not the right way to do women empowerment in the era of women empowerment development inside Western and liberal democratic countries. Second of all, we don't think it's right for the government to intervene in the private sphere of families and the decisions which these families might make for their own well-being. But before I get on to those two substantive points, I first like to give a few rebuttals towards the opening government. Their first idea on why they need to do this is because there's inequality as parents. They complain that fathers currently do not have the same chance as mothers to the same chance as mothers to get used to have these ideas of children. Well, first of all, we say that we're not against the idea of giving these fathers paternity rights. We're against the idea of forcing these fathers to take these paternity rights. But second of all, even if the paternity right wasn't already existent in the first place, which we don't believe that's currently so, we say that the equality of parents, the ability of fathers to choose to be with their child is already a choice that is given for these fathers to plan. Because when people want to make a baby, when they decide to make a children, we don't think that it's something that happens suddenly and they have no idea on how to plan it. We think that fathers, when they continue with the jobs that they have now, and when they continue to place the importance of their work instead of their children, we say that that's a valid choice that the father makes in trying to prioritize the financial income that they get in order to raise their family, and we don't think that it's and we think that it's right for the fathers to make that choice. But second of all, we think that they're kind of exaggerating the idea that fathers completely have no way to build this kinship with their children, because we don't think that fathers work 24/7. We think they have time on weekends. We think they have time on weekdays also, because there's a maximum amount of hours that you can work, and these hours are specially designed so that fathers get a chance to go home and be with their child. So that's basically all the arguments that they managed to elaborate in the opening government. So now I'm going to talk about our substantive points. First of all, why we think that this isn't an area where women empowerment should exist, because that was also what they talked about how we should continue this feminism era of giving women the same rights so that they could also choose. First of all, we say that the point of women empowerment in liberal democratic countries is past the idea that there is structural constraints on women's ability to move right now. They already talked about how women already has a right to vote, they have a right to work, they have a right to get education. We think that all this is enough, and things like affirmative action, placing women directly to work they should be without instead of giving them more ability to gain merit, is something that is wrong. Why? Because we think that women empowerment in liberal democratic countries is now not only about positive discrimination, it's only about giving women ability. And we think that what we've done in the current status quo by giving these women education and giving them the right to vote and giving them the right to change policies has already built enough power to these women in order to take the decisions that they want. There's no, for example, right now there's no stigma in the society that women should get married young and that they're forced to make babies. These kind of decisions, when they're taken now, are decisions taken under the consent of these women. And so we think that in this situation, these women aren't demanding for the fathers to be forced to take paternity leave so that they can go to work and don't have to care for their babies. We think that what they've already decided now is already enough, and we think it's actually unjust for the government to start doing further positive discrimination policies that aren't necessary and that are only going to be unfair for women, for men, and be degrading to women. And if you're asked, yes.
Yeah, sure. So how do you address the injustice to men who don't have access to paternity leave in the first place?
First of all, we say that if it's only going to be about access to paternity leave, we support the idea that that can happen. But your policy isn't only about that. Your policy is about actively making fathers take leave. And second of all, I already responded to the idea of fathers having no access to paternity leave by saying that these fathers already make choices to continue with this line of work and prioritize it instead of their families when they still stay in that job from in the status quo. So second of all, now I'm going to talk about the second point on why we think that these families have the right to make their own decisions to determine how they want to live their life without the intervention of government. We think that basically the family is a private institution, and an institution that decides to determine what values that it wants to create, what kind of families that it wants to have. That's why we give parents the right to choose, for example, where they want to send their children to school, what kind of values they want to teach their children, and we also give them a lot of burden of the funding for bringing up their children. And we think that because of that sense, we give these families the right to decide how they want to build their families, whether they want to stay as a single mother, whether they want to both work and leave their children with a babysitter. We don't decide what values should be brought up in the family as the government. That's why we don't believe it's right for the government to force these fathers to stay with the children just so to build kinship, because we say that we have no right to determine these values. We also think that the family itself itself already has their own considerations when they decide that their fathers should continue to work and not, for example, switch jobs or let their mothers work and for these fathers to stay at home. We think that these decisions have to do with the idea that maybe that for a lot of families, their mothers are more comfortable with being the child, that they're more connected to being the child, and they're very hard to be disattached from these mothers. And we think that it's wrong for our government to assume that making fathers take paternity leave will actually increase the situation, because we don't understand the condition of these families right now. Second of all, we think that it's wrong for these fathers to take paternity leave, because we think that this might also ruin the long-term planning that these families already have. Because paternity leave or maternity leave has a lot to do with how your career is going to turn out. It might take away the chance for you to do policies like fast track, which will help you build your careers better. And we think that ruins the ability of these family to build themselves financially so that they can actually support themselves and they can support their children that they chose to bring in this life. So to sum up, we think that we should not make fathers take paternity leave. First of all, because we think that it's a choice that these fathers already make, and that the government shouldn't intervene in that. Second of all, because we think that this is an unjust form of women empowerment. And third of all, because we think that the family has its own values and the government has no right to decide these values for these families. Thank you.
Thank the Leader of Opposition, and to close the opening government case, I'd like to welcome Faye here.
The opposition talks about we are forcing the men to take paternity leave. But if we are not enforcing this rule to the society, we are also forcing the women to take the whole responsibility to raise a child from its birth. Not only does the woman has the responsibility when they are having a baby, they have to take care of themselves, to give labor, and all this. The process of giving birth is all rely on the mother. And then if this policy allows the parents to allocate the time for their paternity or maternity leave according to their needs, that's how this is giving the men a choice instead to take part in the family, instead of forcing the women to take all the responsibility. Secondly, the opposition talks about each family has their own family planning, and this is a private sphere of the family, and we the government should not intervene in the process of making the decision. However, sometimes the family planning may not be necessarily happen in each family, and when given the opportunity for both men and women to take part in this paternity leave and maternity leave, we allow them to experience more about the family and be more engaged in the whole unity of the family. And now I'm going to talk about continue on with the Prime Minister's point about how it would benefit the children's health if we have both mother and father in the
A point of information.
in the process of nurturing a child from birth later. In the first few months, it's very critical for the child to have a sense of belonging psychologically in the family. The act of breastfeeding is one of the ways for them to feel the sense of comfort and belonging in the family. but this is only the privilege for the women if we don't allow the men to take paternity leave, because when having kinship and having bodily the physical attachment with the father, we can imprint the physical sense to the brain development, and it's critical for the later development, yes.
So what will you do if these men refuse to leave their jobs?
Refuse to leave their jobs? That's why we have this policy implemented, so we can make the father to take part in the family, and then in preparation and in nurturing the child and the recovery for the mother. And second of all, I want to talk about how this gesture of government promotes the equality between female and male gender. Since this is set in the Western democracy, this democratic sense is based on the people power, and we value the equality between men and women that builds the society. We value the chance to share the responsibility between the nurturing of the child, raising the kid. It takes a lot of effort. Not only do you need money to support the family, the household, but you also taking care of the basic need of the child. You need to feed them, you need to bathe the child, all these. If a man is always at work, they would not experience this if they are not staying with the child. And this provides an opportunity for the mother to go back to the society and contribute to the development of the society in the female perspective. And then also, this would ease the female's burden in the physical way and psychological way, because after giving birth, they might have to recover from labor and all the stress they have for giving a child, and then having the paternity leave for men to take the responsibility of the household in the physical way is a way to ease in the female's burden, and then to have a more equal quality of life with the family. And this way, the father also has the opportunity to nurture a child from an early age, so they will experience more of nurturing a child and be more engaged in family, and then it will allow both of them to take part in nurturing a child. It would be a good experience for them to have a stronger unity of family. And this is also very important because people is the basis of the community, and we are allowing them to develop more in the long-term benefit of the society. The family is more developed. The marriage at the beginning is the union of two people, and then the offspring would continue the continuation of human and the society, and this would increase the cohesion of the society and a stronger bond in the family, and this would help to the development of the society. And in a whole, this policy would first of all allow the father and mother to have their shared responsibilities in nurturing a child, and also show that our government cares about the equality of female and male, and this would help in the development of the family and the society in terms of innovation and working environment. So therefore, our motion should stand. Thank you.
Thank the Deputy Prime Minister. I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Roderick, to close out the House today.
So basically what the opening government wants to defend is the personal pleasure of parenting experience to both the fathers and the mothers. But what's ironic about their case is that they want to force both fathers and mothers to define the personal parenting experience as what is given giving more happiness towards the parenting. If what they really want to defend is happiness, we think it should be up to the people to decide what form of parenting they determine as happiness and what form of parenting they want to take, because it is their life, that it is their right to make it more meaningful. I'm going to talk about three things in my speech today. I firstly want to talk about the company's recruiting method. I secondly want to talk about the family's method of parenting and how their model infringes that. And third of all, I'm going to talk about women empowerment, question mark. Let's talk about the company's recruitment method first. This is actually my substantive material. We think that their models will make companies less willing to employ potential parents, because their model will add cost of employing parents to the companies. The companies will have to give financial incentive and compensation for both fathers and mothers for a certain period of time without the parents having to work for this financial compensation. And profit-driven companies will always want to avoid unnecessary costs whenever possible. And this will result in two possibilities. Possibility number one is that the companies will always prioritize people who are not yet married and who are unlikely to have children. And later, this is the second scenario, is that people who want to have jobs will begin considering to not having children. And what's worse, no thank you, this will result in companies obliging the potential employees to sign a contract that states that they will not have children as long as they work there, or at least for a certain period of time, as what happens in several companies in Western liberal democratic countries that want to employ women, that the women are forced to sign obliged to sign a contract stating that they will not get pregnant during certain period of time. And this is bad, no thank you. This is bad for two reasons. The first one is that families will have a harder time to get employed, because all people in this room obviously agree that the unemployment is bad for individual levels. But specifically for families, as what the opening government wanted to talk about, they are the ones who need the job the most, because they have a financial obligation to the children. They have to feed them. They will have to send them to schools, buy them things that they need to go to schools, and also taking additional courses, basketball courses, and they also have to start saving for the college fund of the children. And we think that this is particularly bad for people who want to have families. But second of all, we think that this will discourage people to have children, because people who want to have children cannot get easily employed by the companies, because companies will see employing potential parents as something that is unfavorable. And this is particularly bad for Western liberal democratic countries, whereas in most of these countries there is an age gap in which there is a very little amount of young people, that it will become unsustainable for them to have to pay taxes for the pension fund of the elderly, as what is happening in Japan, as what is happening in UK, other European countries that they wanted to talk about. And that is why this is bad and unacceptable. But secondly, I want to talk about the family's method of parenting. My first speaker have told you very clearly that having a family is a personal choice that parents take to make their lives meaningful. The first assertion that we heard from the opening government is that families with two parents, male and female parenting, is always a better form of family than non-male female parenting. First of all, we think that this is offensive to a lot of stakeholders in our liberal democracy. We think it's offensive for gay couples, it's offensive for single parents, for them to assume that having two male and female will always be a better form of parenting. But second of all, there are a lot of possible alternatives that single parents, for example, or people who both have jobs for the children, to make to also make their life meaningful. For example, there is a daycare alternative for parents who both of them are working to put the children there. And guess what? Some companies actually have the daycare right there in the workplace of both the parents and the children. What I'm trying to say is, it is not always practically worse for children to have both of their parents working, or at least only the fathers working. But third of all, we think that it is also unfair for the government to force companies to nurture the value that government sees as important. Because if it is the government that sees that the value of having two parents as always better than not having two parents, it is not the obligation of the companies to do so, because the company's obligations of giving more financial compensation for the mothers that is necessary is already fulfilled, and it is unfair for the government to force them to do so. But before that, no, thank you. A minute later, and we've also heard from my first speakers that the parenting experience cannot be infringed by the government, because the parenting experience may involve the fathers having a fast track because they want to have a specific college fund set for the children, and how the mothers are already working in home because the mothers are already confident that the fathers will have sufficient amount of income, and we think that it's unfair for government to determine which kind of family is best and which kind of family is worse. But before that, yes.
If governments can force companies to offer maternity leave for mothers,
yes,
why would it be outside of their purview to do so for fathers?
Because we think when we think about maternity leave, we think that it is obvious that someone has to stay there in the house, and we think that there is a biological explanation of why it is the mothers that is better to stay at home, because it is the mothers that will have to undergo pregnancy, it is the mother who will have to breastfeed, and we think that there is a biological and logical explanation rather than this value that they wanted to talk about without any logical explanation, and we think it's unfair for the government to force these values. But let's talk about the women empowerment, because they said that this will leverage the female position. We think that the women already have the choice to not have children in the first place. The women already have the choice to discuss whether or not she will be the one who will take the maternity leave, whether or not they will have a babysitter, whether or not they will send their children to the daycare, or whether or not the children will go to the parents' house. We think that women in liberal democracies have already so many choices that it is not forced upon them to always stay at home. But we think when they do want to stay at home, we think that it is their personal form of pursuing happiness, and the government cannot infringe that and seize them as something bad. What the opening opposition has told you is that families have different ways of catering to the needs of the children and catering to their happiness, and it is unfair for the government to determine which form of happiness is best and which form of happiness is worse. And we've also told you that their policies will shift the unemployment level to becoming unfavorable towards families that they wanted to talk about. We should oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and welcome the Member of Government, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot of things that I want to do in my speech today. I'll give you a brief run. The first of which is I'll give a little bit of rebuttal of what we've heard in the round thus far and build on some of the arguments that the front government has given. I think that they've given you a lot, and I think that the front opposition hasn't necessarily addressed them all. The next thing that I really want to do is bring some new matter to the round, because I think there's several issues that are really significant that haven't necessarily been discussed. The way that I'm going to be packaging these is I'm going to talk about social change. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is a collective action problem and why is it applicable in this situation? Why is it the case? And the second thing that I want to talk about is the integrity of the family and society moving forward from this point on. I think that these are really significant and they have to be addressed. First, I want to give some rebuttal. I think it's really confusing when we heard the last speaker give up and in a response to my partner's POI basically say that women are biologically programmed to be mothers, and therefore they must be mothers, and that's their job in society. Especially since the leader of the opposition gets up and says, who is the government to define what a parent's role is in the child rearing relationship, right? I think it's a really odd situation that what they're saying is, families shouldn't be structured like this. They should be able to decide how they're structured, but biologically speaking, the government is going to control how those families are structured. I think that's a bit of a shift within their own case. I'd like to see an explanation. I think that both of those points have fallen under the argumentation that you've heard from the first government, so it's really not that much of an issue. But the other thing that they talk about, the other two things that they talk about are basically the economic and corporate effects of this kind of policy. And the second is the matter of parenting, I'll call it. So the first thing that they say is that people aren't going to hire persons who don't want to have, or people aren't going to hire persons who want to have children. I think that this is a really interesting point, especially seeing as 50% of children who are actually born now come from couples who are not married. So I think that the corporate solution is going to be really difficult in order to implement this policy, asking questions like, could you ever perceivably want kids, especially when females are fertile for 20 or 30 years. I think that this is a bit of a problem. Women can change their mind. Men can change their mind too, right? So we see this as being a little bit confusing. But I think the problem that they really enforce with this is that in the status quo, this is the kind of pressure that's put only on women. And we think that that's really unfair, especially when the first opposition is concerned a lot about equality of women and having it in a good way. We think that it's really perverse then that they're going to guarantee rights for men, but not guarantee rights for women, as in the status quo. We think that that's really confusing. I'll take you a little bit. The second thing that they talk about, in the matter of parenting, I think that I've already addressed. I think that I've made it clear that it's maybe even a little bit offensive that they're saying that women are biologically capable and men are not. I don't know, if I was a man in the room, I'd probably be offended. Sure, go ahead.
Even if I was offensive, we never force women to take that maternity leave, unlike your first proposition here.
Right, so here's what I want to do when I talk about my extension, because I think that the first government does a very clear job in addressing why it's great to have paternity leave within societies as an option. What I really want to clarify is why it's absolutely necessary to force men to take paternity leave. And these are my 3 points. So the first point we see is a collective action problem, which I'm going to define it as thus. So we see that men potentially want to take time to spend with their children. We'll say that that's a good thing. We say that it's a good thing for men to be involved in their children's lives. We like that idea on side government, and we probably like that idea on side opposition. We think that it's especially hard, though, when men aren't guaranteed this time off. First opposition keeps talking about it's bad for them because they can't be economically productive because then they're not at work. Okay, well, leave is going to be paid, so we don't see that as being an issue. What we see as being an issue is the high burden of entry for men to take this paternity leave, right? It takes a lot of action by which a lot of men are going to have to take paternity leave for it to become the norm. The barrier for this is incredibly high, right? That's why we don't see men choosing to take paternity leave, because it's not seen as something that's acceptable socially or corporately, economically. Then you don't get men taking paternity leave. What it becomes is not a real choice for these men. We think that that's a significant problem. We think that you're not getting this equality.
Ma'am?
I think that the other thing that you especially have to talk about is the access to the job market. Because while they're talking about people not being hired because they could potentially have children, aka everyone in the population, what they're not acknowledging is that this is specifically targeting, being targeted against women, right? We say that there is a barrier to entry for these women because what happens is these women ultimately can produce children, right? And if they produce children and they request maternity leave, they have to be given this maternity leave. We understand that. That's how the system works, right? The problem is that men, the problem is that men are going to be hired more frequently because these women can't choose to take maternity leave, right? So then we see that the government and society is enforcing this stereotype that men are more productive, men are better in society, that we should take them, that these are the people that we should be cooperating with. We think that this is really perverse because what this does is this enforces that women are less productive members of society, not something that a Western liberal democracy and a government wants to promote. I'll take the back half.
How is it targeting women when women fought for these rights to be given?
How is it targeting women when women forfeit these rights? I think that this is the problem, that women shouldn't have to forfeit these rights, and men right? We think that these are rights that everybody should be entitled to, that it's not just women in this situation. We think that men get benefits out of this too. That's what I want to talk about in my second point, because I think by forcing men to take leave, what you're ultimately getting is the betterment of the family. I'm not going to take any more replies, sorry. The thing is, here's how it works. The man is involved with the child's life. We think that this is good. We're not forcing parents. This is exactly how you have to spend your time on paternity leave. We think that that would be really perverse, right? But we also offer maternity leave and don't enforce that women have to do X, Y, and Z in order to have this maternity leave and have it count to something, right? What we're saying is that this increases the family dynamic because it gives men an actual option in which they can choose to interact with their family. And we think that that's the really significant thing. Because we lower the barrier of entry, we make it easier for males to participate, not just after they come home from a long day of work because they have to be the stereotypical breadwinner, right? They can still be the breadwinner and they can be a loving, caring, nurturing father. We think that those are the real benefits that you're getting on the government side of the house. We think that it especially affects unmarried couples, so children who are products of people who don't necessarily live together, who aren't long-term partners, because it gives them this kind of option. We think that it generally enriches the human experience because you get to share that time with your child, you get to share that time to your use, you're able to take it. These are the reasons why we think forced paternity leave is important.
Thank the member of government, and may I now invite the member of opposition to the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this debate takes place against the backdrop of an economic crisis that has been associated with high unemployment, low wages, and a pressure on the living standards of families. It also takes place against the backdrop of a broken society. I would like to extend this debate by saying that the government's model is bad for the economy, bad for society, and bad for the child. But allow me to do some rebuttals. Firstly, on this issue of an arbitrary equality, we believe in equality, but we believe in equality of purpose. And we say it's not a good thing to juxtapose maternity leave and paternity leave, because maternity leave is required so that the woman can recover from the stress, the trauma of childbirth. This is not so for paternity leave. Also, it is necessary for the mother to have a time to breastfeed a child in order for the child to be able to be healthy. The Deputy Prime Minister said that breastfeeding is a privilege of motherhood. Of course it is. It's the only females are only sex with active mammary glands. So we don't see this as a point. Secondly, it's your family life. They propose that family life is on that the leave is necessary for family life. But I say, if leave is necessary to enforce family life, what happens when the leave ends? Family life doesn't only take place in the policy of a leave. Family life can take place outside of a leave. Thirdly, the right. This idea that forcing fathers to leave their jobs is a right. How can it be a right? Let's look at other rights. The right to vote, the right to silence are rights when you have a freedom to do something. Infringement of a freedom is not a right. It's a travesty of government. Madam Speaker, allow me to enter my main point. My first point is that families cannot afford for fathers to be wageless at this time. The Prime Minister not accepted. The Prime Minister did not say that his leave would be a leave with wages. So we on the side of the house can assume that he will be sending fathers home without wages. If this is the case and accepted, fathers will be left without money to provide food, to educate their children, to provide health for their children. This is not in the best interest of the child accepted, and it's very unwise. We believe that this is unfair to the child. It's against the right of the child because the child will be neglected. A child has a right to education and a right to health. Do not abuse the rights of the child by neglecting, by sending home their fathers. Unemployed, many families are one check away from being homeless, and we believe that's what you'll be doing. You'll be putting children on the streets. Secondly, we believe it's bad for the economy. As the opening house said, if we assume that, if you want to assume that your leave would be a leave with pay, you're not forcing companies to pay persons who are not working. We say in the present economy, where companies are already strained because of reduction in demand for their goods and for their services, it's bad for the economy it's bad for the economy to force companies to pay persons who are not working. We believe that this is not the right time to do such a plan. Not accepted. Thirdly, I would like to say, as the opening Prime Minister said, that if you not force men to, if you not make it mandatory that men must leave should their wives become pregnant, it will make men who are interested in having families less employable. As the opening government said, and we agree that this is bad for families because it might make men less employable, but it's also bad for society because it means that men might postpone having children until a later date. We believe this is bad for a number of reasons, not accepted. Firstly, it might precipitate a population crisis because as men defer having children, they might defer it until a time where they are not fertile and cannot have children. If you look at the one-child policy in China, we saw where experts say that 400 million children births were prevented because of the one-child policy. We say that if you defer pregnancy for too long, defer fertility for too long, many times you might have men being able to have one child because they're not forced to postpone childbirth to protect their careers. We say this might be good in China, but it's bad for Canada, it's bad for Italy, and it's bad for economies that are underpopulated and need an increase in population growth. So we believe this is bad. We also believe it not accepted, it will precipitate a family crisis because you will have the situation developing where men are having children later down in age. This is bad because the same kinship that you want to foster, men might not be able to adequately foster it in their older ages, Secondly, the economic welfare of the child. If parents are forced to have children at an age where they are not able to take care of them properly because they are no longer working, this is not in the best interest of the child. And also, it can precipitate a health crisis, not accepted, if persons are forced to have children later down in age. You rightly said that women have 30 years of fertility, but not all these are safe. So if you force couples to have children later down in age, you have increased occurrence, accepted a minute, of Down syndrome, of trisomy 13, and all other genetic diseases. This is unsafe social engineering by the government. Accepted.
If men want to take leave but can't for economic reasons, aren't you forcing them in the status quo to either leave their job or postpone having children?
We are giving them the choice whether to leave or whether not to leave. And we are saying that men can plan the vacation already in the status quo where they can be home when their child is born, but we don't force them to leave. Also, my third point, we believe that this will create a vacuum in male-dominated professions. We find it very scary for President Obama to leave his office just because Michelle Obama is pregnant. I find it very scary to ask General Petraeus to leave Afghanistan because his wife is pregnant back home. What about male-dominated professions like doctors, like engineers? You have a very dangerous vacuum developing in these professions because you are forcing men to leave their jobs, and we say that men are in very important positions. You are jeopardizing national security and you're jeopardizing leadership in our country. This is not wise. Another thing I'd like to point out is that governments are interfering in relationships. You base them on in Western liberal democracies. But what about fathers who are sperm donors? What about fathers who the mothers don't know? Are you expecting these fathers to take maternity leave also? What about separated parents? You see the Prime Minister based his model, said only spoke about married couples, but there are couples who are not married. We do not expect that the government to interfere in this relationship and force couples to come together, all in the interest of unsafe social engineering. So Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, sir, what have we told you? We have told you it's not good for the economy. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the child. It's against the rights of the child. We are told you precipitate a population crisis. It will precipitate a health crisis. It will precipitate a crisis because it will create a vacuum in male-dominated societies. It's unnecessary government interference in relationships. And it's against the right of the man to self-determination underneath the International Convention of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 16. This is not a right, it's an infringement on freedom, and we are proud to vote.
Thank the member of opposition. I'd like to welcome the government whip to close the government case.
I want to frame today's round by asking two questions. One, is it absolutely necessary to force men to take paternity leave? And secondly, what society would you rather live in? But first, a couple points of rebuttal from what we heard from back opposition. So the first argument we heard is that families can't afford this, right? We're in a recession, they can't take care of this. So 3 responses. One, I think it's reasonable to assume that they would get paid, since this is how all maternity leave functions, right? We would just assume that it would go the same way. They don't have to explain every single detail about how you're going to be getting this. Secondly, we think that unemployment would cover this, right? If you lose your job, then social security nets are there, and even if those didn't apply, we would say that the government should just create them. We don't think this is inherently problematic. But then they make this argument that might be a little bit better, which they tell you that it's going to be bad for the economy, right? But we think that it's okay to have labor policy that hurts companies when there are overwhelming interests. We would say that requiring companies to provide health care for their workers is something that's okay, or requiring them to pay for paid vacation or for maternity leave are all examples where we've accepted in society that it's okay to harm the economy a little bit when there are social things at hand that are extremely important. Then they make this argument that it's going to be unemployable because people are going to ask you do you want to have a baby? There are an infinite number of problems with this. One, it's incredibly unenforceable. 2, there are lots of accidental pregnancies, right? So it's unclear to me how this would happen. And 3rd, you could just outlaw these contracts in the first place and say that this is unacceptable labor practices. And they say there's a population crisis. So 1, we don't think it's really going to change who has babies for all the reasons I just gave you. But even if that's the case, actually decreasing the number of babies that you have is good because it creates demographic dividends where larger portions of your population are actually working, and it decreases the amount of stress on the environment of an already overpopulated Earth. So let's talk about these 2 questions that I want to pose to you. First, is it necessary to have paternity leave, right? Because we think that this is really something that we need to look at is, should men be forced? So we think there are 4 reasons why it is absolutely necessary to force paternity leave. And so the first one comes from the first government. They say, look, by forcing, not having options open to men, it forces women to do all of the childbearing. So we'd say that even if it's okay to force men, because there's benefits of decreasing pressures that's on women. But I think the second reason is really important that Jenny gives you, is that there's a collective action problem. The problem we have in this round is that first opposition is look guys, just have mothers or fathers choose to do this. However, men don't have the choice. One, as Jenny pointed out, it's socially unacceptable to do so, so there are social pressures. But 2 is that it's economically not viable. There's a huge collective action problem. No business will offer paid paternity leave. Why is this the case? Because if no one else is offering it, why would you offer it? It's not going to provide any advantage to you except that you're going to have to pay it. But if everyone is doing it, I'll take you in a moment, then it provides a financial option for men to do it back out.
So according to what you said, you want government to create unemployment and then pay for it? That makes no sense.
It's not creating unemployment. It's creating a wonderful opportunity to spend time with your child, with your wife, and with your family. We think those are things that are worth the government paying for. We think there are things that are more important than money in society, and we're proud to stand in proposition of those things. The third reason why we would tell you that it's necessary to force this to happen is because there's structural inequality within society. I think the problem with the whole opposition bench in this round is they accept a society in which men are not able to raise children, where we endorse the biological connections that women might have vis-a-vis breastfeeding. We think it's important for governments to challenge these structural inequalities and these structural standards. But more importantly, we think that it's necessary in instances in which the government has helped to create these inequalities, right? When governments have created requirements for maternity leave, we think that they should also create requirements to balance out the inequalities that they have created. Fourth, yeah, sure.
If you think that there are more important things than money, then why don't you leave the choice up to the fathers to choose whether or not they want to stay in their job or with their families?
Because it doesn't exist in society, A, and B, because there are larger societal signals that need to be sent. I'll talk about this later at the very end of my speech, but basically the government needs to enforce these sorts of things in society because they've already created a structural inequality that have made it unacceptable for men to do this, so you have to get started somewhere, right? There's this huge collective action problem, it isn't being addressed. So what society would you live in? One, we would say that men would want to live in a society with forced paternity leave because it would actually be available to them, right? It's not like on their side men get to choose and on our side they have to take paternity leave. It's on their side men are not able to take paternity leave unless they're willing to take the economic hit. And on our side, since everyone is doing it, there are financial abilities for men to be able to actually take leave. We think the dichotomy that they've drawn is extremely problematic. We think women also benefit, right? As Jenny told you, the problem is that women don't get access to jobs because companies won't employ them because they might become pregnant and they might have to pay maternity leave. So women are barred from vocations. We think that we erode this by having to pay men the same sort of paternity leave. It equals out the playing field, makes it better for women to get access to men-dominated industries. We think it's ridiculous that there hasn't been a female president. We think that we should create things that would make it better and easily acceptable for women to have access to presidencies. We think this is problematic on their side of the house. But more importantly, what about families that want to have kids, right? They make this argument that, like, look, families are going to have to make all of these vocational things, well, like decisions about when they're going to have children. One, we think this is problematic because, like, they argue on their side of the house that it's okay for men to plan their entire careers around vocation in order to have children. We think that's forcing men into a situation that's problematic, and we think that we should liberate them from that and give them opportunities to choose vocations independent of their aspirations to have children so that they can have both at the same time. Last thing I want to talk about are social standards under this point. Right? We would tell you that it's important to erode gender roles that exist in society, even if they have biological roots. They want to allow these to continue to proliferate. We think it's a good thing for the government to come out and enforce this policy because it's going to send a very strong message to society that men can and should raise children. We think this is beneficial for families. We think this is beneficial for gay couples, right? Because it makes it socially acceptable to raise children, but it also makes it easier for them, right? If you have two gay couples and neither of them can get paternity leave to raise an adopted child, that might be really problematic. But now we actually provide them with financial options so that they can support those children. Last thing I want to talk about is this idea of men-dominated industries, right? They want to preserve those. We think it's better to erode the system, allow women to have access to these offices. We are so happy to propose.
Here.
Thank the government whip, and to close the whole debate, I'd like to welcome the opposition whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My partner reiterated this one key point. The government's policy is bad for the economy, bad for society, and the common thread between both of them is that it is bad for the child. My duty today, ladies and gentlemen, is to address 5 key points or clashes in this debate. I'll first deal with the model as presented by the government. Secondly, I will address the issue of democracy. Thirdly, I'll do proper respect to the health of children. Fourthly, I'll address the closing government's notion of collective action. And finally, I'll end by concretizing and supporting my partner and the opposition on a whole that the government's policy is bad for the economy, bad for society, and bad for the child. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we find a number of problems with the government's model. Firstly, there's an issue of force versus freedom. The government argued that they would force fathers to take paternity leave. And on-side opposition, we say this goes against their basic rights according to Article 1 of the International Convention for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And the government has failed to properly address this human right abuse that they are perpetuating. Not accepted. They've also, with reference to their model, they've also failed to address a point of information. What, my friends, will happen when fathers refuse to take this paternity leave? To this day, ladies and gentlemen, they have failed to address that question. And they have also failed to consider fathers in important positions. Should we ask President Obama to step down General Petraeus in Afghanistan? They have failed to address these key issues. The closing member even said that he believes it's high time America had a female president. So are we to assume then that this is some ploy to have a female in the White House without considering merit? Not accepted. And to my second point, the point of democracy. Opening government said that they would do this in the interest of equality, but again, their proposal does not do their arguments justice. With reference to equality, one, women fought for the right to have maternity leave. So in terms of equality, we also put into this equation equity. My partner made mention of the biological reasons in support of maternity leave. Hence, it is impractical for us to force, I'll take in a minute, for us to force this paternity leave on mothers. Accept it.
Are you possibly suggesting that the biological importance of a father being involved is null and void?
Not at all, my friends. What I'm saying, we're looking at necessity and we're looking at the impact of your policy. In terms of necessity, it is absolutely crucial that women get time off from work. That is absolutely crucial. In terms of necessity and the impact it will have, we say, one, it is bad for the economy because we find that either they'll be unemployed or a reduction in wages, ladies and gentlemen, will have dire implications for the family. Opposition has said that many families to this day are one paycheck away from losing their home. So by putting them on paternity leave, reducing their income, we find that they are unable to meet the basic needs of the family. In terms of health of the child, and this is where we look at where the policy of the government is not in the best interest of the child. In this current economic environment, ladies and gentlemen, by placing this burden on the family, it becomes harder for parents to educate their children. It becomes harder for parents to provide proper health care for their children. And this is why we believe the government's policy simply will not work. Closing government spoke of collective action, and their justification for forcing men to take paternity leave is to ensure that it becomes a norm. This was adequately refuted by closing opposition, by referring to China with their One China policy, a collective action plan as recommended by the government. He noted that between 1979 and 2001, 400 million births were prevented. This is the social and demographic impact that this collective action had on the Chinese society. We therefore believe that a collective action plan, not accepted, as proposed by the government, will not work. Finally, the fifth point, as emphasized by, I'll take in a minute, as emphasized by closing opposition, is bad for the economy. You put a strain on businesses to provide for these men when they take paternity leaves who are not adding to the productivity of the company. This is a burden on the family because this is a reduction in their income, and this has an impact on the child because their basic needs would not have been met because of a diminishing capacity to meet these needs. I accept it.
So can you explain to me why it isn't a good thing, but still Western liberal democracies require paid vacation for employees?
The bigger issue here, judges, is the impact of the government's policy. We believe it is a good thing for men to spend time with their children, which is why the opposition has recommended that fathers factor in the pregnancy of their wives or the mothers of their children into their vacation time. This way, this limits the burden put on the companies to pay them. This limits the burden put on the family to take care of the children because they would have already planned for this vacation. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, what has this debate come down to? Simply put, it has come down to an opposition victory. There are many loopholes in the model presented by the government. We have identified why the model presented by the government will not work. We've considered the health of the child, we've looked at the economy, we've looked at its social implications. So in essence, I end with the very team philosophy that closing opposition has. The government's policy is bad for the economy, it's bad for society, and it is bad for the child. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition rests.
Thank all the speakers. Please cross the floor, shake hands, and then go outside.